The morning sun filtered through the blinds of a quiet suburban hotel room, casting thin stripes of light across a man sitting at the edge of the bed. He wasn't supposed to be here, not like this anyway. Dressed in faded jeans, a slightly too big flannel shirt, and scuffed work boots, he looked nothing like the person who usually occupied boardrooms and signed million-dollar checks. He ran a hand over his newly shaven jaw, still unused to the smoothness. For the first time in years, he felt invisible, and that was exactly the point. He'd built something real, something that started with a single diner, 2 fryers, and a dream that people deserved a warm meal without having to count every penny. Over 2 decades, that dream had grown into a chain of all-you-can-eat buffets spread across the country. But lately, something felt off. The quarterly reports were strong, the stock price steady, and the marketing team kept sending him photos of smiling families with full plates. Yet every time he walked into one of his own restaurants in his usual suit and tie, the staff stiffened, the managers rushed over with rehearsed speeches, and customers suddenly became unnaturally polite. He wasn't seeing his business, he was seeing a performance. That's why he'd decided to disappear for a few days. No assistants, no alerts, no VIP treatment. Just him, a fake name, and a hunger to see what his company really looked like when no one was watching. He grabbed a worn baseball cap from the nightstand, pulled it low over his forehead, and checked himself in the mirror one last time. Good. He looked like any other guy grabbing lunch on his day off. Maybe a mechanic. Maybe a retired teacher. Maybe someone just trying to stretch his paycheck. He slipped a few crumpled bills into his pocket, left his phone in the room, and walked out into the crisp autumn air. The buffet he chose wasn't one of the flagship locations. It was a mid-sized branch in a strip mall, the kind that buzzed with regulars but rarely made headlines. He'd picked it precisely because it was ordinary. As he approached, he saw the familiar sign, bright yellow letters over a red awning, but the paint was chipped near the corner, and the landscaping needed trimming. Small things maybe, but they added up. Inside, the lunch rush was just beginning. The air smelled of roasted chicken, garlic bread, and something faintly sweet, maybe apple pie. Families filled the booths, seniors gathered at corner tables, and a few solo diners sat with newspapers or phones. He grabbed a tray and joined the line, keeping his eyes down, moving slowly like he had nowhere else to be. The food looked mostly fresh, though the steam table holding the mashed potatoes was running low, and the broccoli looked a little too soft. He piled a modest plate, some roasted chicken, a scoop of rice, a few carrots, and found a seat near the back, close enough to observe but far enough to stay unnoticed. For the first 10 minutes, everything seemed fine. Servers moved quickly, refilling drinks and clearing plates. A young couple laughed over shared dessert. An older woman carefully wrapped leftovers in a napkin, tucking them into her purse with practiced ease. Then he saw him. Near the dessert station, an elderly man stood hesitantly, tray in hand. He was thin, with a slightly stooped posture and clothes that had seen better days. A faded cardigan, patched slacks, shoes worn at the heel. He glanced around as if unsure whether he was allowed to ask. Finally, he approached one of the servers, a young woman with a tight bun and a name tag that read Tina. "Excuse me," the man said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "Would it be all right if I had a little more soup? The chicken noodle, if there's any left?" Tina didn't look up from her clipboard. "We're running low," she said flatly, "and it's almost time to refresh the line anyway." The man nodded quickly as if he'd expected that. "Oh, of course. I understand. Thank you anyway." But just as he turned to walk away, Tina muttered something under her breath, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Some people act like this is a shelter. All you can eat doesn't mean all you can take home." A few nearby staff members exchanged glances. No one laughed, but no one corrected her either. The elderly man kept walking, head slightly lower, and found a seat 2 tables down from the CEO. The CEO froze, fork halfway to his mouth. His chest tightened. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, cold, dismissive, as if the man's hunger was a personal inconvenience, not a human need. He watched as the older man ate slowly, deliberately, making every bite count. He didn't take seconds. He didn't even look toward the soup station again. Something inside the CEO cracked open. He remembered his own father years ago, standing in line at a soup kitchen after losing his job. He remembered the shame in his eyes, the way he'd whisper, "Just for a little while, son. Just until things turn." He remembered vowing that if he ever had the chance, he'd build a place where no one felt that shame, where a full plate wasn't a luxury, but a given, and now in one of his own restaurants, that promise had been broken. He pushed his plate away, appetite gone. He wanted to stand up, say something, defend the man, but that wasn't why he was here. If he revealed himself now, it would shut everything down. Staff would panic, stories would be rehearsed, and the truth would vanish like steam from a cooling pot. No, he needed to see more, understand more. So he stayed quiet, watched, listened. Over the next hour, he noticed other things. The way Tina snapped at a busboy for spilling a drop of water. The way the manager, a man with a Bluetooth earpiece permanently in his ear, spent more time texting than checking on customers. The way expired stickers on the salad bar went unnoticed. The way staff whispered about time wasters who stayed too long or asked for refills. But he also saw kindness. A dishwasher, older and quiet, refilled the water pitcher without being asked. A cook slipped an extra roll onto the tray of a young mother juggling two toddlers. These moments were small, almost invisible, but they were there. When the lunch crowd thinned, the CEO paid in cash, left a generous tip under his plate, and walked out. The autumn air felt colder now. He didn't head back to the hotel right away. Instead, he wandered into a nearby park and sat on a bench beneath a maple tree, its leaves turning gold. He thought about the man in the cardigan. Who was he? Did he come here often? Did he have family? Was this his one hot meal of the day? He pulled out a small notebook he'd brought, not for business plans, but for observations. In neat handwriting, he wrote, "We measure success in covers per hour, not in dignity served." Back at the hotel that evening, he called his assistant not to check emails, but to request personnel files for the location he'd visited. He wanted to know who Tina was, how long she'd worked there, whether she'd ever received customer complaints. He also asked for the store's staffing schedule, food waste reports, and recent mystery shopper scores. Within an hour, the documents arrived via encrypted email. As he read, a pattern emerged. Tina had been there 3 years. High sales numbers. She pushed drinks and desserts aggressively. But buried in old HR notes were 2 written complaints. One from a customer who said she spoke to me like I was trash. Another from a co-worker who accused her of hoarding tips. Both had been dismissed with a note, "High performer. Minor interpersonal issues." The CEO stared at the screen. When did high performer become an excuse for cruelty? He thought about his company's core values printed on every employee handbook: respect, generosity, community. Had those become just words on a page? Had he let efficiency drown out empathy? He lay back on the bed, hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd go back, not as a customer, but as someone trying to understand. Maybe he'd sit near that older man again. Maybe he'd strike up a conversation. Maybe he'd learn his name, because names mattered. People mattered. And somewhere along the way, his company had started treating customers like numbers on a spreadsheet instead of human beings with stories, struggles, and simple needs, like a second bowl of soup on a cold day. He turned off the light and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. In his mind, he kept hearing that muttered comment, sharp as a knife. And beneath it, quieter but stronger, the echo of his father's voice. Build something that feeds more than just the stomach. Morning came too soon. He showered, dressed in the same clothes, and walked back to the buffet. This time he didn't grab food right away. He stood near the entrance, watching the flow of people. How they greeted each other, how they moved through the line, how they found their seats. And then he saw him again. The man in the cardigan waiting patiently in line, tray in hand, eyes fixed on the soup station. The CEO took a deep breath. Today he wouldn't just watch. Today he'd listen, not just to what was said, but to what was left unsaid. Because sometimes the most important truths hide in the silence between words. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to make things right, not with a grand gesture, but with a single act of real human kindness, starting with himself. The buffet was quieter this time, mid-morning before the lunch rush. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and the scent of cleaning solution mixed with the faint leftover aroma of yesterday's roasted vegetables. The CEO stood near the drink station, pretending to study the soda choices while keeping an eye on the man in the cardigan. He'd arrived early, just after the doors opened, and now sat alone at a corner booth, hands folded around a steaming cup of coffee. The CEO grabbed a small plate, just a roll and a banana, and walked slowly toward the empty seat across from him. He didn't ask. He just smiled slightly and gestured to the chair. The man looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Go ahead," he said, voice gentle, like someone used to making room for others. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Inside, a dishwasher clattered in the back. The CEO took a bite of his roll, chewed slowly, then said, "You come here often?" The man gave a small shrug. "Once a week? Tuesdays if I can manage it." "Good day for it," the CEO replied. "Less crowded." "That's part of it," the man said, stirring his coffee with a plastic spoon. "But mostly, it's warm in here. And quiet enough to think." The CEO didn't push, he waited. Sometimes silence invites truth better than questions. After a while, the man spoke again. "My wife used to love buffets. Said it reminded her of church potlucks, everyone sharing, no one turned away." He paused, eyes distant. "She passed last spring, cancer, quick but not kind." "I'm sorry," the CEO said, and meant it. "Thank you." The man looked down at his hands. Thin, veined, but steady. "After she was gone, the house got too big, too quiet. So I started walking, found this place by accident. Like that no one asks questions. You pay your money, you eat your meal, no pity, no fuss." The CEO felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just about food. It was about dignity. About belonging in a world that often forgets people once they stop being useful. "You ever ask for seconds?" he asked gently. The man chuckled, but there was no joy in it. "Used to, not anymore. Learned my lesson." He didn't elaborate, but his eyes flicked toward the serving line where Tina was restocking fruit cups with brisk efficiency. The CEO nodded. He understood. They talked a little more. About the weather, about how grocery prices kept climbing, about how hard it was to find a doctor who took his insurance. The man spoke without bitterness, just quiet resignation. He wasn't looking for help. He was just sharing his truth, like handing over a worn photograph and saying, "This is my life." When the man finally stood to leave, carefully folding his napkin, placing his tray on the return cart, the CEO watched him walk out, shoulders slightly hunched against the wind. He felt a strange mix of admiration and shame. Admiration for the man's quiet strength. Shame that his own business had made him feel unwelcome. He stayed at the table long after the man was gone, watching the staff prepare for lunch. What he saw troubled him more than he expected. The salad bar had wilted lettuce at the bottom of the bin, hidden beneath fresh greens on top. The mac and cheese looked dry, its edges crusted from sitting too long under heat lamps. A young busboy tried to refill the bread basket, but the manager waved him off. "Wait till noon," he said. "Don't waste it. Waste it." As if bread was more valuable than hunger. Later, near the dessert station, the CEO overheard Tina coaching a new server. "Watch the ones who linger," she said, voice low but sharp. "Especially the old guys or the ones in ratty clothes. They'll drain your tip pool and take up space for paying customers." The new server looked uneasy. "But it's all you can eat, right?" "Technically," Tina said with a smirk. "But we're not running a charity. Management cares about turnover. Faster tables, more covers, bigger bonuses." The CEO's stomach turned. This wasn't just one bad employee. This was culture, and culture starts at the top. He spent the rest of the day moving through the restaurant like a ghost, sitting at different tables, listening to snippets of conversation, watching how staff treated different kinds of customers. A well-dressed couple got immediate refills and warm smiles. A mother with 3 kids was met with tight-lipped patience. A man in work boots who asked for extra gravy was told, "We're not a soup kitchen." But then there was Luis. Luis was the dishwasher, the quiet man the CEO had noticed the day before. He didn't speak much, but his eyes missed nothing. When the elderly man had been mocked, Luis had paused for just a second, jaw tightening. Later, when the man came back for coffee, Luis had quietly filled his cup without being asked. And when the man left his tray, Luis made sure it was cleared gently, not tossed like trash. During a lull in the kitchen, the CEO lingered near the dish station, pretending to wait for a refill. Luis nodded politely but didn't engage until the CEO said, "You've got a good eye for people." Luis looked surprised. "Just doing my job," he said in accented English. Most people think your job is washing plates, the CEO said softly. But I think it's more than that. Luis studied him for a long moment, then gave a small knowing smile. Maybe, he said. But kindness doesn't show up on the schedule. That night, back in his hotel room, the CEO couldn't sleep. He spread the personnel files across the bed. Tina's record was clear on paper, efficient, punctual, high upsell numbers. But the human cost wasn't listed. Neither was Luis's quiet decency. He pulled out his notebook again. This time he wrote, "We reward speed, not soul." He thought about the retired teacher, the man who came for warmth as much as food. He thought about Luis, who saw people when others only saw problems. And he thought about himself, sitting in boardrooms while his values eroded one policy at a time. The next morning, he returned to the buffet again. This time he didn't sit near the back. He chose a table right in the middle, where he could see everything. And he watched as the elderly man walked in. Same cardigan, same careful steps. But something was different. As the man approached the soup station, Tina was there, arms crossed. "We're out," she said before he even asked. The man nodded quickly. "Oh, of course." But then Luis appeared holding a small pot. "I saved some," he said quietly, ladling a generous portion into the man's bowl. "Fresh batch?" "From this morning." Tina shot Luis a look, but he didn't flinch. He just handed the bowl to the man with a nod. The CEO's chest swelled. Not with anger this time, but with hope. After the man sat down, the CEO walked over. "Mind if I join you again?" The man smiled faintly. "Company's nice." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then the man said, "You're not from around here, are you?" "No," the CEO admitted. "But I've been thinking a lot about this place. Why's that?" "Because it used to mean something," the CEO said carefully. "And I think it's forgotten." The man looked at him, really looked at him, as if seeing past the flannel shirt and baseball cap. "Places don't forget," he said softly. "People do." Those words stayed with the CEO all day. People do. That afternoon, he called his head of operations. Not to complain, not to fire anyone yet, but to ask a question. When did we stop training our teams to see people and start training them to see profit per seat? The silence on the other end said everything. He knew what he had to do. But it wouldn't be enough to fire one server or rewrite a policy. Real change had to come from the inside, from leadership that remembered why they started in the first place. As he left the buffet that evening, he passed the elderly man one last time. They didn't speak, just a nod, a silent understanding. The CEO walked back to his hotel under a sky streaked with orange and purple. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a witness. And witnesses have a responsibility to speak, to act, to restore what's been lost. He didn't know exactly how he'd fix it yet, but he knew this. The next time he walked into one of his restaurants, it wouldn't be as a stranger in disguise. It would be as someone ready to rebuild, not just a business, but a promise. A promise that no one should ever feel ashamed for being hungry. The third morning dawned gray and damp, the kind of day that makes you want to stay under the covers. But the CEO was already up, pacing the small hotel room with a cup of too-strong coffee in hand. He hadn't slept much. The words from the retired teacher kept circling in his mind. Places don't forget. People do. He kept thinking about Luis too, the quiet dishwasher who'd save soup not because he had to, but because it was the right thing to do. That small act of decency had lit something inside him, like a pilot light flickering back to life. He knew today would be his last day undercover. After this, he'd have to step back into his real role, the one with the title, the office, the responsibility. But before he did, he needed to see the full picture. Not just the cruelty, not just the kindness, but everything in between. The messy, complicated truth of how his company actually ran when no one was watching. He arrived at the buffet just after opening. The morning crew was setting up, wiping tables, filling condiment dispensers, turning on the warming trays. The air smelled of bleach and yesterday's grease, not yet covered by the comforting sense of lunch. He took a seat near the window, ordered black coffee, and watched. Tina was already there, barking orders at a new busboy who'd stacked the clean glasses unevenly. "Do it again," she snapped. Customers notice. And when they notice, they complain. And when they complain, my numbers drop. The boy nodded quickly, eyes down, and redid the stack with trembling hands. But then Luis walked in, carrying a crate of clean silverware. He didn't say anything to Tina, just gave the busboy a quiet nod as he passed. That small gesture seemed to steady the boy. He stood a little straighter. The CEO sipped his coffee, thinking. It wasn't that Tina was evil. She was just trained to see customers as metrics, staff as cogs, and kindness as wasted time. And who had trained her? Him. Indirectly, through every spreadsheet that prioritized speed over service, every bonus tied to upsells instead of empath. A little after 10, the first real customers trickled in. An elderly couple sharing a newspaper, a young man in paint-splattered jeans grabbing a quick bite before his next job. The CEO watched how Tina greeted the couple with a tight smile, but ignored the worker until he asked twice for a refill. Luis, meanwhile, made sure both got fresh napkins and clean forks without being asked. Then, just before lunch, the retired teacher walked in. He moved slower today, leaning slightly on a cane he hadn't used before. The CEO's chest tightened. He wanted to stand, to offer help, but he stayed seated. This wasn't his story to interrupt. The man made his way to the coffee station. Tina was nearby, counting straws. She didn't look up. But Luis did. He stepped over, poured a cup, added a splash of cream, just the way the man liked it, the CEO remembered, and handed it to him with a soft, "Good morning." The man smiled. "Thank you, my friend." No one else seemed to notice the exchange, but the CEO did. And in that moment, he realized something important. Culture isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in these tiny, everyday choices, like pouring coffee for someone who's had a hard week or choosing not to. He spent the lunch rush observing the rhythm of the place. Families came and went. Servers hustled. Dishes piled up. And through it all, Luis moved like a quiet current, filling water glasses, picking up dropped utensils, once even helping a toddler reach the ice cream scoop when her parents were distracted. No fanfare, no expectation of thanks, just steady human care. Later, during a lull, the CEO wandered toward the kitchen entrance under the pretense of asking for more napkins. He lingered near the swinging door, listening. Inside, Tina was talking to the shift supervisor, the man with the Bluetooth earpiece. "We've got to crack down on the regulars," she said, "especially that old guy in the cardigan. He's here every Tuesday, eats like a bird, stays forever. He's killing our table turnover," the supervisor grunted. "I know, but corporate says customer retention is key. Can't just kick people out?" "We don't have to kick him out," Tina said. "Just make it less comfortable. Skip the refills. Let the bread run low. He'll get the message." The CEO's hands clenched at his sides. It wasn't outright cruelty, it was something worse. Calculated indifference. A system designed to push out the people who needed the place most. But then Luis's voice cut in, calm but firm. "He pays his money. Same as anyone," Tina scoffed. "Yeah, but he doesn't tip. And he takes up space better used for parties of 4. "He's alone," Luis said simply. "Alone doesn't mean invisible." Silence followed. The CEO could almost picture Tina rolling her eyes, the supervisor checking his phone, Luis going back to his station without another word. But the truth had been spoken. And once truth is spoken, it can't be unheard. That afternoon, the CEO didn't return to the hotel. Instead, he walked to a nearby diner, a small family-run place with checkered tablecloths and handwritten specials on a chalkboard. He ordered pie and coffee and sat by the window watching the world go by. He thought about his father again. How he'd worked double shifts after losing his job. How he'd never complained. How he'd always said, "As long as we've got food on the table and love in the house, we're rich." The CEO had built his first diner to honor that spirit, to create a place where anyone, no matter their wallet, could sit down and feel like they belonged. Somewhere along the way, he'd let that vision get buried under profit margins and performance reviews. He pulled out his notebook. This time he didn't write about policies or personnel. He wrote, "We forgot that hunger isn't just in the stomach. Sometimes it's in the heart." Back at the buffet that evening, his last night undercover, he didn't sit at a table. He stood near the entrance watching people leave. A young couple holding hands. A group of teenagers laughing over dessert. The retired teacher, walking slowly toward the bus stop, cane tapping softly on the pavement. And then he saw Luis clocking out. pulling on a worn jacket. On impulse, the CEO followed him, not closely, just enough to see where he went. Luis walked 3 blocks to a modest apartment complex, climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, and knocked on a door. An older woman answered, smiling. She hugged him tightly. A child's voice called from inside. Luis stepped in and the door closed behind him. The CEO stood on the sidewalk for a long time. He didn't need to know the details. He could guess, maybe Luis's mother, maybe his sister, maybe someone he was helping. What mattered was this: Luis carried kindness not just to work, but home. It wasn't a performance. It was who he was. That night, in the quiet of his hotel room, the CEO made a decision. He wouldn't just fix the problems he'd seen. He'd rebuild the foundation. Not with memos or mandates, but with meaning. He called his assistant again. "Cancel my meetings for the next week," he said. "I'm coming back. And I need you to gather every store manager, every regional lead, every training coordinator. I want them all in one room. No excuses." He paused, then added, "And find out everything you can about Luis. Not for punishment, for recognition." He hung up and stared out the window at the city lights. Tomorrow he'd walk into that buffet not as a stranger, but as the person responsible. He'd look Tina in the eye, not with anger, but with sorrow. He'd thank Luis not with a bonus, but with respect. And he'd make sure the retired teacher never had to wonder if he was welcome again. Because businesses don't fail when profits dip. They fail when they lose their soul. And his? It was still there, faint maybe, but flickering. Waiting to be fed. He packed his few belongings, folded the flannel shirt he'd worn for 3 days, and placed his baseball cap on the nightstand. The disguise was done. The real work was about to begin. As he turned off the light, he thought of the empty chair at the buffet, the one the retired teacher always sat in. Soon he'd make sure that chair meant something, not just a place to sit, but a promise. You belong here. And this time he'd keep it. The morning air was crisp, sharp with the kind of clarity that comes after days of uncertainty. The CEO stood outside the buffet, not in faded jeans and a baseball cap, but in a simple dark sweater and clean slacks, clothes that said "I belong here" without shouting it. He didn't walk in with fanfare. No entourage, no announcement. Just him, a quiet breath, and the weight of everything he'd seen. Inside, the lunch rush hadn't started yet. Staff milled about, resetting tables, filling ice bins, laughing over the last of the morning coffee. Tina was at the register, counting the till. Luis was in the back, already washing the first wave of breakfast dishes. The retired teacher wasn't there yet, but his usual booth sat empty, waiting. The CEO stepped inside. At first, no one noticed. Then a busboy froze mid-wipe. A server dropped a stack of menus. Tina looked up and her face went pale. He didn't smile. Didn't scowl. He just walked to the center of the dining room and said calmly, "Could I have everyone's attention for a moment?" Voices hushed. Feet shuffled. Within 30 seconds, every employee, servers, cooks, dishwashers, the shift supervisor with his Bluetooth still blinking in his ear, stood in a loose half circle, eyes wide, hearts pounding. "I've been here," the CEO began, "for the past 3 days. Not as your boss, as a customer. As someone who wanted to see what this place really feels like when no one's watching." A few exchanged nervous glances. Tina looked at the floor. "I saw things that made me proud," he continued. "And things that made me ashamed." He paused. Let the words settle. "I saw someone mocked for being hungry. I saw staff told to make certain customers feel less comfortable so they'd leave faster. I saw expired food hidden under fresh and kindness treated like a waste of time." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence in the room was heavy enough. "But I also saw something else," he said, softer now. "I saw someone pour coffee for a man who'd lost his wife. I saw someone help a child reach the ice cream. I saw dignity offered quietly without expectation. That is the soul of this place, and we've let it get buried." He turned slightly, looking directly at Tina. She flinched but didn't look away. "You're good at your job," he said. "You're fast, you're efficient, you drive sales. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that this isn't just a business. It's a table. And at this table, everyone deserves to be treated like they matter." Tina's eyes filled, but she didn't cry, just nodded once tightly. "You're suspended for 1 week," he said, "not as punishment, but as a chance to reflect. When you come back, You'll go through a new training program. Not on upselling. On empathy. On seeing people, not just plates. Then he turned to the shift supervisor. You knew what was happening. You didn't stop it. You'll be reassigned to a support role in operations, away from direct customer service until you can prove you understand what this company stands for. The man opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. He'd seen the look in his boss's eyes. This wasn't negotiable. Finally, the CEO turned toward the kitchen. Luis, he called gently. Luis stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel, expression unreadable. The CEO walked over and extended his hand. You didn't know who I was, but you treated people like they mattered anyway. That's not just good service. That's character. He paused, then said, effective immediately, you're promoted to shift lead. You'll help redesign how we train new staff, not just on tasks, but on values. Luis didn't smile right away. He just looked at the CEO for a long moment, as if measuring his sincerity. Then he shook his hand. Thank you, he said simply. I'll do my best, the CEO nodded. I know you will, but he wasn't done. He turned back to the group. Starting today, we're changing how we measure success. No more bonuses based only on speed or drink sales. From now on, every location will be evaluated on something we've ignored for too long. Kindness. He explained his new idea, the empty seat program. Every restaurant would reserve one table every day for someone in need. No questions asked. No proof required. If someone walks in looking like they could use a warm meal and a quiet place to sit, they get a seat. Full stop. And we'll train every employee, he said, to recognize that hunger isn't always about food. Sometimes it's about loneliness, about dignity, about feeling like you still belong in the world. A young server raised her hand timidly. What if someone abuses it? Takes advantage? The CEO didn't hesitate. Then we've fed someone who needed it. That's not abuse. That's the point, he looked around the room. I didn't build this company to make rich people feel full. I built it so no one, no matter their age, their wallet, or their story, would ever feel ashamed for being hungry. After the meeting, the staff slowly returned to their stations, quiet, thoughtful. The CEO didn't leave, he stayed. He walked over to the soup station, picked up a ladle, and began refilling the chicken noodle pot himself. A few minutes later, Luis joined him, not saying a word, just working beside him like they'd done it 100 times. Then the door opened. The retired teacher stepped in, cane in hand, eyes tired but steady. He stopped short when he saw the CEO standing there. Recognition flickered, not of his face, but of his presence. Something had changed. The CEO walked over. Good to see you, he said. The man nodded slowly. You're not a customer anymore, are you? No, the CEO said. I'm the one who should have been paying attention all along. He gestured to the booth. Your seat's waiting. This time, when the man went to the soup station, Tina wasn't there. But the pot was full, fresh, steaming, and beside it, a small note in Luis's handwriting. Extra noodles on request. The man smiled, just a little, and filled his bowl. Later that afternoon, the CEO sat with him again. No disguise, no pretense, just two men sharing a table. I heard what you said today, the man said quietly, about the empty seat. It's for people like you, the CEO replied. People who deserve more than a meal. They deserve respect. The man looked down at his hands, then back up. You know, I used to teach history, told my students that civilizations aren't judged by their wealth or their buildings, but by how they treat the least among them. He paused. Maybe your company's about to write a better chapter. The CEO didn't answer right away. He just watched as Luis brought over a fresh slice of apple pie on the house and set it gently in front of the man. I hope so, he finally said. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, the CEO walked through the restaurant one last time before leaving. He saw servers asking elderly guests if they'd like more coffee. He saw a cook pack extra bread for a mother with tired eyes. He saw Tina, still on duty during her notice period, quietly refilling a water glass for a man in worn shoes. No eye roll, no sigh. Change wouldn't happen overnight. But it had begun. Back in his car, he didn't call his assistant. He didn't check emails. He just sat for a moment watching the lights of the buffet glow against the twilight. It looked different now. Not just a business, a promise being kept. and for the first time in years he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 weeks had passed since the CEO walked into the buffet not as a stranger, but as himself. The air outside was colder now, the trees bare and the streets lined with the quiet hush of early winter. But inside the restaurant something warm had taken root. He hadn't come back right away. He'd given space for changes to settle, for new habits to form, for trust to grow. But today felt right. He wore the same dark sweater as before, no disguise needed. This time he didn't stand in the center of the room or call a meeting. He just walked in like any other guest, tray in hand, and joined the lunch line. The difference was immediate. The salad bar was fresh, labels clearly marked with prep times. The steam trays held generous portions and the staff moved with purpose, but not panic. At the dessert station, a new sign read, "Take what you need. Leave room for kindness." It wasn't corporate jargon. It was handwritten in Luis's careful script. And there, in the corner booth, the one by the window, the retired teacher sat with a full plate and a cup of coffee. He looked better, less tired. His cardigan was still worn, but his posture was straighter, his eyes brighter. When he saw the CEO, he didn't look surprised, just smiled and gestured to the seat across from him. "You're back," he said. "I am," the CEO replied, setting down his tray. Couldn't stay away. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only comes between people who've shared something real. Outside, a light snow began to fall, dusting the parking lot in soft white. "I heard about the empty seat program," the man said after a while. "Saw it on the local news. Said your company rolled it out to every location." "It's spreading faster than I expected," the CEO admitted. "Other restaurants are copying it. Not the name, but the idea. That's what matters." The man nodded. "People are hungry for more than food these days. They're hungry to be seen." Just then, Luis approached, not in an apron but in a clean uniform with a small shift lead pin on his chest. He carried 2 mugs of hot cider. "Thought you might like this," he said, placing one in front of each of them. "Homemade. Cinnamon and apple peel." The CEO looked up at him. "You're doing good work," Luis shrugged, but his eyes shone. "Just reminding people what this place was meant to be." He walked away, pausing to help a young couple with a stroller navigate the crowded aisle. No rush, no impatience, just steady care. The CEO watched him go, then turned back to the man across the table. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me what I'd forgotten. That running a business isn't about numbers on a screen. It's about the person sitting alone in the corner wondering if they still belong." The man stirred his cider slowly. "You didn't need me to remember that. You just needed to stop long enough to listen." They talked for a while, about how the program had brought new faces into the restaurant. A single mother who came in after her night shift, a veteran who ate quietly every Thursday, a teenager who sometimes sat for hours with a notebook, writing poems. No one asked questions. No one rushed them. They just got a seat, a meal, and space to breathe. Later, as the lunch crowd thinned, the CEO walked through the dining room, not as an inspector, but as a guest. He saw a server kneel to tie the shoelace of a wobbly toddler. He saw a cook pack a to-go container for an elderly woman who said she'd save half for tomorrow. He saw Tina, back from her suspension, carefully refilling a water glass for a man in a threadbare coat. Her movements gentle, her voice soft. She caught his eye and gave a small, respectful nod. No shame, no defensiveness, just quiet understanding. He didn't speak to her. Didn't need to. Her actions said everything. On his way out, he stopped by the host stand. A new sign hung there, simple and clear. "One table is always open for anyone who needs it." Beneath it, a small basket held handwritten notes from customers. "Thank you for seeing me. This place saved my Tuesday. My dad would have loved this." He picked one up, read it, and placed it back gently. Outside, the snow had slowed to a few drifting flakes. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching families leave the restaurant, laughing, bundled up, carrying leftovers in doggy bags. Across the parking lot, the retired teacher walked toward the bus stop, cane tapping lightly, shoulders squared against the cold. Luis followed a few steps behind, holding an umbrella over him without being asked. The CEO smiled. He drove back to the city, not to his office, but to another one of his locations, a smaller branch on the edge of town. He didn't go in. just parked across the street and watched through the window. Inside, a young couple sat with their child, sharing a plate of mashed potatoes. The server, a woman with tired eyes but a warm smile, brought over an extra roll. "Just in case," she said, placing it on the table with a wink. The CEO watched the father's face soften. Watched the mother mouth "thank you." Watched the child giggle as she tore the roll in half. He finally felt like he was home. Back at headquarters the next day, he called a company-wide meeting, not over video, but in person, with every regional manager, trainer, and store lead gathered in the main conference room. No slides, no spreadsheets, just him standing at the front holding a single paper plate. "I used to think success was measured in revenue," he said. "Now I know it's measured in moments like this." He told them about the retired teacher, about Luis, about the empty seat, about the quiet dignity of a hot meal offered without judgment. "We're not just feeding bodies," he said. "We're feeding hope, and that's worth more than any quarterly report." After the meeting, he walked through the office halls listening to conversations shift from covers per hour to "how did we make someone feel today?" He approved funding for empathy training in every location. He redirected bonus structures to reward acts of kindness, not just sales. And he made sure Luis's voice was included.